Well, let's take a look today at the Middle East, primarily since 1945. However, we'll step back to just after World War I to get an idea of the situation that's really shaped the Middle East in the modern period. So let's take a look. Some of the issues in the Middle East. The Middle East is a very large area. It is sometimes defined differently by different people. As you can see on the map here, the Middle East, many people include parts of North Africa, Libya, Sudan, Egypt. Some might even go a little further over in North Africa. Some include Turkey, some don't. Some include all the way to Afghanistan. Some people might include other areas as well. But this is sort of the general area. But the Middle East is one of the most unstable areas in the world, and it has been for many years. It's not only unstable, but of course it's had a lot of conflict, a lot of warfare, a lot of terrorism. Now, we can trace a lot of the problems in the Middle East, or the situation, if we want to try to understand it. We need to go back and look at the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the rise of Europe as colonial powers in the region, and also consider local nationalism versus the European colonialism. So there were a lot of newly formed countries in the Middle East that had dependent economies primarily on the West. Their militaries looked to the West. Other factors, too, that we need to consider is, of course, oil. A growing pan-Islamic movement. Pan-Islamic. In other words, they want to unite all these regions together with Islam. The Zionist movement, which is a movement to create a nation state for Jews, Israel, primarily is what we see the outcome of that. Technology, and of course the issue of Palestine, which is always problematic in this area. Now, we're going to see, and of course I don't expect you to figure out all of these various components, but I put this up here to show you how interrelated many things are. Okay, how interrelated they are. On the left, you see the West: UK, USA, France, Germany. Okay, the EU. On the right, you have powers such as China, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Russia. And then, of course, when you get in the center part, obviously at the center of a lot of this is Israel, as you can see, is pretty much in the center there. And then you can see organizations or groups, for example, the Taliban here, who of course have been affiliated with Afghanistan, but they are also elsewhere. Fatah, which is connected with Palestine, but also shows up elsewhere. The Islamic State, or ISIS, of course, is in several locations, but has been highly influential in Iraq and now Syria. Al-Qaeda, or Al-Qaeda, as you see here, with its base near Afghanistan. So you can see some of the key players here. Syrian rebels. Syria is a big hub, especially today. Lebanon, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. Okay, so we don't have time to try to dissect this whole chart, but it will let you see how things are interconnected. Okay. Well, another thing to consider is the literacy rate in the Middle East. That is, how many people can read and write. Okay. This is changing. Of course, literacy rate is going up. This is a fairly recent chart here, probably within the last 3 to 4 years. But notice, literacy rate of those 65 and older, quite low in many of these areas. 16%, 3%, 35, 28. A lot of them between 20 and 30%, except for Jordan, 55%, and we see Israel looks like 58%, Syria 39%, Iraq 19%. And then take a look between the ages of 15 and 24, much, much higher. Not 100, but 99, 98. When you take a look, say, at Iraq, where it's 19% for 65 and older, it's 82% 15 to 24. So education and literacy has been making an impact on the population. Okay, so something to consider. Not everyone there can read. As I've traveled in the Middle East, I know that I have encountered people that could not read or write. Sometimes when I needed to get somewhere, I'd have someone write in Arabic the address I needed to go to so I could take a taxi. And I'd get in a taxi and I'd show him the note. He had no idea what it was on some occasions. So I've encountered it personally. Now here's another thing to consider. It's the makeup, religious makeup of the Middle East. And notice this kind of zoomed in a little bit from Afghanistan to Egypt. But notice that we have Sunni Muslims, we have Shia Muslims, Christians, and Jews, and then other. Okay? So you can see it's kind of hard to make it out here because the chart is very small. But Sunnis are sort of this lime green that you see a lot of in Turkey and down through down into Iraq, northern Iraq, parts of Syria, and then you have Shia or Shiites are the darker green that you see in Iran, which is majority is Shia, and Yemen, you see that, parts of Afghanistan, and parts of Lebanon, and some sections controlled by Syria. Okay, and then Christianity is in this sort of a pinkish color, which you would also see some in Lebanon. You would see some in Palestine, certain areas of Egypt near the Nile, Cyprus, pockets of it up here in Turkey. Judaism is more of an orange color. Of course, you see that in Israel, and excuse me, not too many other places. Okay, so this is another thing to consider, that it's about 55-56% of all Muslims are Sunni, especially in the Middle East, and about 35-36% are Shia or Shiite Muslims. Less than 4% are Christians, and by the way, that number is probably getting smaller because Christian communities have been targeted in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, and so forth. Here's an interesting one from December of 2017, so now about 5 years ago. Percentage of the population that expresses a favorable view of ISIS, the Islamic State in Syria. 21% in Syria. Egypt 2, Palestine 2, Jordan 3, Lebanon 0. That's interesting. Tunisia 13, and so forth. But take a look. The other area that you maybe don't think about is that's highly Islamic is Southeast Asia. Malaysia and Indonesia, and look at that, 11% support ISIS in Malaysia, 4% in Indonesia. Now, another big factor to the region is oil. 99% of the oil is in just 6 countries, and you see all these sort of darker gray patches. This is where oil has been found, where oil deposits are located. And then what we have is a kind of average wealth of individuals. So take a look. So with oil will come wealth. So take a look at Kuwait. The average wealth for each person in Kuwait is almost $50,000. Of course, this is a few years ago. But in Qatar, it's almost $100,000. The UAE, United Arab Emirates, about $45,000. Oman, about $20,000. And you can see in Israel, $37,000. Saudi Arabia, $24,000. But then you take a look at some of the other areas, they're rather low. Egypt, a little over $3,000. Iran, a little over $5,000. Iraq, a little over $6,000. Syria, just a little over $2,000. So you can see there's a lot of poverty in the Middle East. But there are some areas that are extremely wealthy. So sometimes we tend to think of everyone in the Middle East has oil and everyone in the Middle East has wealth. That's simply not true. It's located around the Persian Gulf primarily. This is the Persian Gulf. And in Iraq, some up in Turkey, Syria, and down to Oman. There's some in Yemen. There's some in Egypt. Jordan, very little. Most of that is shale. Most of this is shale that they have there. But there is some in Jordan and a lot of it in Saudi Arabia. But the real bulk of the oil is from, let's say, the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, down in the Persian Gulf, and down to Oman. So take a look at the difference. Yemen is here. Qatar is here, not that far apart. Look at the difference in average wealth. Almost $100,000 in Qatar, about $1,400 a year in Yemen. Okay, South Yemen. Now, Israel and Palestine is only about 8,000 square miles. It's about the size of New Jersey. And it's located, it's hard to even see. It's in the center of this map. But even though it's a very small piece of property, it divides the world. People that recognize Israel, people that recognize Palestine. Some only recognize one, some only recognize the other, some will recognize both. So the United States only recognizes Israel. The United States, Canada, Greenland, much of Western Europe, Australia, recognize Israel. Much of South America and, of course, Russia, China, Southeast Asia, only recognize, some only recognize Palestine, and some recognize both, the darker yellow like Russia, the southern part of Africa, and most of South America. So this is a real flashpoint in the history. The situation in Syria, of course, all this is constantly changing. This is a map that's shown from 2015. Syria has been in upheaval for at least a decade or more. But you see where most of it is. A lot of this is desert out here where it's very gray. Not much there. This is Deir ez-Zor. I've been all around Syria various times. Really traveled around. I went to Deir ez-Zor, Aleppo. I was out on the coast out here at Latakia. Went to Hama and Homs. Of course, Damascus, Dera. I used to excavate right up in this area here, very close to Dera, but on the Jordanian side, near the Golan Heights. So you can see now that Syria is just filled with trouble, terrorism and fighting. There are rebels that are there in the green who are fighting against the government, which is controlled by a very powerful, most would call a dictator. Then you have those that are loyal to him. His name is Assad. And then you have Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is in the yellow. Hezbollah is aligned with Assad. And then, of course, you have foreign forces that have moved in now. The Islamic State has moved in, and sometimes others as well. So it gets a very tricky, very complicated situation. You have the Kurds. The Kurds are the yellow up here. The Kurds, actually, there are Kurds across the border in Turkey. And, of course, they're in Syria, they're in Iraq, they're in Turkey. They see themselves, what they would like to have is a country called Kurdistan. I don't see that happening anytime soon. But they have divided allegiances, and so this is where the United States, especially in Iraq, worked with the Kurds in the north as allies. Now, if we go back and try to figure out how all of this got started, how did this all get so messy? If we go back to World War I and we take a look at the Middle East at that time, was really the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is fragmenting. When it becomes clear that after World War I, Ottoman Empire would disintegrate, there was a plan, a secret agreement. This agreement was to divide up Ottoman territory in Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Iraq, what would be Kuwait and some of the Gulf states as well. Notice they had a blue zone, they had a red zone, they had an A zone, they had a B zone. They had an international zone. The international zone was supposed to be basically Palestine to Jerusalem. The B zone under the British would have its major city be Amman. The A zone under the French, Damascus. The blue zone, also French, Beirut. And the red zone, direct British control, with the main city being Baghdad. Now, this is called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. It's a secret agreement to carve up the Ottoman Empire into zones that would be controlled by the French and the British. You have to also remember the British already controlled Egypt over here. So they would have from Egypt all the way across to the Gulf, and of course a lot of oil in this area. So this is what they are interested in. So this was drawn up in 1916. All right, so let's take a look now. The Ottoman Empire is declining in the 19th century. Sometimes called the sick old man of Europe. It had extensive territory in Europe, the Balkan states, what would be former Yugoslavia, all across Croatia, Bulgaria, all those areas to the Black Sea. But then, of course, they had a lot of territory, what modern-day Turkey, but all the way down into Iraq, Iran, Egypt, across North Africa. Well, as they're declining, they try to change. They're not sort of keeping up with the modern times. And so they draw up a new constitution in 1876. The Sultan who is leading the Ottoman Empire at this time is named Abdul Hamid. And he stops those changes when he comes into power in 1876. So what might have worked gets stopped. And we see then a lot of people get upset that he stopped this because they think the Ottoman Empire needs to change to stay solvent and stay viable. Now, interestingly enough, within the Ottoman Empire, there are the Turkish people. Of course, the Turkish people run the Ottoman Empire. However, there are Turkish nationalists who resist the Sultan and who call for change and who basically want to get rid of the Sultan, and they want to form an independent state of Turkey. Now, you might figure out who won this if you just take a look at a modern map, right? So they formed the Committee on Union and Progress, CUP, and eventually the Sultan is exiled out of the Ottoman Empire, and it's in large measure done by these Turkish nationalists who are often called Young Turks. By the way, Young Turks are not always young, and they're not always Turks, so it's a bit of a misnomer, but it's basically a Turkish movement, a movement for an independent Turkish state. And of course, World War I is the final blow to the Ottoman Empire, when it will basically go out of existence shortly after World War I. We should mention Lawrence of Arabia. Perhaps you've heard of Lawrence of Arabia. If you ever want to watch an interesting movie, you could watch Lawrence of Arabia, the movie from the early 1960s, which would give you some insight into the character of Lawrence. He unifies the Arab people in opposition to the Ottomans. You have to remember that Turks are very different people than Arabs, and they have usually not gotten along very well. And so he is British, and he had worked in the Middle East in archaeology. He had learned the terrain. He had learned the language. During World War I, he was sent to Egypt to work on the maps, and then they send him in to be a liaison, to be a British coordinator, perhaps is another word, that would bring about the unification of the Arabs, who often the Arabs had conflicts with each other, different groups, and they would fight with each other, but he tried to get them to unify to fight a common enemy, which was the Ottomans. A lot of promises were made to the Arabs that if they did this, they would have independence. Britain will move from Egypt into Palestine and seize it. And of course, Lawrence and the coalition of the Arab forces move northward from the desert in Jordan and come up into Syria, up to Damascus and so forth, and are the first to arrive in Damascus. Well, the empire is collapsing, and the Ottomans will sign an armistice in 1918. And by the way, much of what Lawrence tells them, promises them, I think he really believes they'll get, but they do not. They do not get independence. Now, in the area that we would call Turkey today, they didn't have many heroes from World War I, but Mustafa Kemal is one of them. He's a war hero. He is then becomes involved in this idea of creating a Turkish state. When the last sultan flees in 1923, the Turkish Republic begins. And the organizer, the founder, we might say, he's sometimes called the George Washington of Turkey, is Mustafa Kemal. Mustafa Kemal becomes the president, and he also receives a sort of honorific title, Ataturk. Ataturk means he's the father of the Turks. Okay, so Ataturk is normally the way he is known. In basically every Turkish home, there would be a portrait of Ataturk, and you see his portrait all over the place in Turkey even today. So the Turkish Republic now becomes a major player in the region itself. A lot more we could say there, but one of the things he's going to do is to modernize Turkey and to secularize Turkey. So really change it from being a strongly Islamic state to a modern state. They had been using Arabic writing, which goes from right to left, to write Turkish, not to write Arabic, but to write Turkish. He will say, no, we're going to use European style writing. We're going to write from left to right. We're going to use European characters, the alphabet, and there's not going to be any imperial titles like Sultan. You see the fez up there, the hat that the red hat the guy's wearing, that is outlawed. The veils are outlawed. They end up getting Western style names, first and last names, first, middle, and last names, like we do in the West, not the way that was done in the Islamic world. They're going to abandon Islamic law and use Swiss law. The fez, the red hat, and the veil is forbidden. He begins to try to industrialize Turkey, building factories and trying to get a more modern economy. Now, on the probably more of a downside, he suppresses any opposition that comes his way. So, this is Ataturk. Now, if we move to Iran, quickly take a look at it. The Qajar dynasty, 1794 to 1925. Their capital will move to Tehran. At that time, it gets reorganized. The leadership is Sunni Muslim, but there's pretty much a majority of the people are Shia or Shiite Muslims. But the Shah of Iran will have a Western-style constitution, and he get a lot of support from both Russia and Britain, primarily because they want oil. And by the time you get into the 20th century, early 20th century, oil becomes a critical commodity, and it still is today, as you know. And so Russia wanted oil. They also wanted access to warm water and sort of a hold, part of a hold in the Middle East. And Britain, of course, supports the Shah because primarily of the oil that's available there. And so what we see when does this change? Oil is found in 1908. And this oil that's found in 1908, of course, gets a lot of interest in the West because we see the coming of oil discovery with, of course, the development of the automobile, the internal combustion engine. and the use of the automobile for transportation. So we see in 1921, Reza Khan will take over Iran, and he lives till 1944. And Reza will now be called the Shah of Iran, in a new dynasty, the Pahlavi dynasty. World War I, of course, removes the Ottoman influence in Iran, which had been there until that time, and now they begin to operate more independently. Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, you see pictured. Well, we see that Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi is pictured there in the upper right in that white uniform jacket. He is the Shah of Iran, and he will be the Shah of Iran from early 1950s until 1978. He is overthrown in a coup in 1978. He is also develops cancer about this same time. And the Shah is overthrown by an Islamic revolution led by the Ayatollah Khomeini, who is the guy pictured down there at the bottom. This is when the Iran hostage crisis took place, when the Islamic rule will come in. They will go into the U.S. Embassy. They will take everyone there captive. They will hold them hostage. They hold them hostage for about a year. Let's just say about a year. This has a major impact on the election. There's an election in 1979. Jimmy Carter is the president. And of course, he's running against Ronald Reagan. And we'll see that he attempts to launch a rescue. The rescue fails. The helicopters crash in the desert and so forth. And so all of this leads to not the only factor, but this is bad publicity and definitely aids Ronald Reagan being elected in 1980. And then, on the very day he's sworn in, the hostages are released. So, which was an interesting way. He had threatened that they would send military action in. So, at any rate, the Iran hostage crisis will end then in early 1980. But the radical Shia or Shiite government, Islamic State of Iran is there, and it's still there today. It will sponsor terrorist groups like Hezbollah and others who will go into Lebanon, who will go, work against Israel, also in Syria, and so forth. And they're still functioning that way. You may have heard recently in Ukraine that it is Iranian drones that have been used by Russian forces to launch bombs and so forth in Ukrainian towns. Well, another big factor in the Middle East is Arab nationalism. Iranians are not Arabs. Turks are not Arabs. Afghanis are not Arabs. Arab people speak Arabic, and they are very, ethnically and culturally different, although they're Muslims. So not all Muslim people are Arabs, and not all Arab people are Muslim. Okay, but Arabs wanted independence primarily. At the beginning in World War I, they helped the British and they were promised to be independent. Of course, that did not happen. So the British sort of made a promise they did not keep. And after World War I, we have the League of Nations, which creates mandates in this area. Iraq, Jordan, Palestine were under a British mandate, British control, while Syria and Lebanon under a French control. And you notice there's no independent Arab state anywhere to be seen. So if we go back to the way this is, here we see the League of Nations mandates in 1920. We see Palestine under British control. We see Transjordan, British control. We see Iraq, which includes Kuwait at this time, British control. Syria and Lebanon, French control. Now, what really creates a problem then, if you take a look in Palestine, you have Jerusalem, and you have this area here, which today you would recognize this is basically Israel. Israel did not exist, and there had been a big push for Israel to have their own homeland in Palestine. Now, Palestine was inhabited, still in large measures, a significant number of Muslims, but at this time it was mostly Muslims. There was a Balfour Declaration issued in 1917, about this time of the year. So now, 105 years ago, named for the British Lord Balfour. The idea here is that Palestine would become a homeland for the Jews. And according to Lord Balfour, the British were going to support this idea, but it said it had to be understood that by creating this homeland for the Jews, it shouldn't harm any of the rights of the non-Jews. So the Jews would get Palestine eventually in the 1930s. But this has caused some people to call this part of the world is sometimes called the Promised Land. They say with the Balfour Declaration, it's the twice Promised Land, because it's promised to the Jews and it's promised to the Palestinians, the Muslims. And of course, this sets up a lot of the problems that have been in this area and still are in this area today. So here is a picture of Lord Balfour, and you can read it there. He sent the following letter to Lord Rothschild. He was a wealthy and influential Jew in England, and in regard to an establishment of a national home in Palestine for Jewish people. And then he says the following: I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. And so then this gets to the statement. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this objective, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Okay, so it's basically saying, yeah, we know there's a lot of Arab Muslims living in Palestine, but we're in favor of this becoming a Jewish homeland, national homeland. Now, by creating this Jewish national homeland, we be it understood that this shouldn't in any way bring any kind of hardship to the people that are already there. Now, of course, this is an impossibility. How can a group of people move in and establish a nation in a territory where there's already people there who believe it's their land and their home? So this is the basis then for a lot of the problems with Palestine. So there you have it. I just read it to you. I won't read it again, but the key words there, national home for the Jewish people, and then nothing shall be done which prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities. All right, so that sets up a whole lot of stuff there. We don't have time to go into great detail. But let's take a look at Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was never brought under European control. Why, you might think? Well, mainly because there was nothing there. It's sand, primarily. Very dry, desert. Even the Arabs in the area call, you see the big part of it down here, called the empty quarter. There's just really nothing there. But, of course, that will change when oil is discovered here. There are 4 regions in Saudi Arabia. The Hejaz, you see it here. This is the Hejaz because this has Medina and Mecca. These are the important areas for the journey, the trip to Mecca, the Hajj. And you have East Arabia, you have South Arabia, and you have Najd, which is mostly the center area. Basically, Saudi Arabia will come, and it gets its name, Saudi Arabia, for Ibn Saud, King Ibn Saud. He will rule Saudi Arabia as a complete monarch, a total monarch, and creates a hereditary monarchy or dictatorship in Saudi Arabia that's still there today. It's still his sons and grandsons who are ruling Saudi Arabia today. Now, they are out of the way, so the Europeans don't bother to go down there, but any Ottomans that come are pushed out in the 1920s, and we see the kingdom of the Saudi kingdom in 1932. They call in some geologists to look for water because they don't have much water. While they're looking for water, what do they find? Oil, and lots of it. And so the Americans, companies, are very good at drilling for oil, refining oil, and so forth. A lot of them were down in Texas. And so the Americans, say, hey, let us come in and see if we can find more of this oil. Standard Oil will get the first strike of oil in 1938. And basically, they will draw up a deal with the Saudi Arabians and create a company, an agreement, a cooperative called the Arab or the Arabian American Oil Company, or Aramco. Okay, Aramco. So this is, they worked out a deal of fact that they would do all the drilling, they would do the refining, they would do the shipping, they would do everything, and they would give the Saudis $1 a barrel, and they didn't have to invest anything. They didn't have to do anything, just collect the money. Now, soon they had a lot of money, and of course today they control it completely. But that's was the beginning of the oil in this part of the world. All right, we're going to end it there for today, and I hope you have a great day, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.